I call the honourable member Chris Ockenbold.
I move that the question be now put. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
I'm going to hear Sue Moroney. I call the honourable member Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill and the principal act on which it amends. I actually want to take a slightly different tack to what my colleagues have taken, because I get that the Health and Disability Act does have a lot to do with this bill, because it's about the care of people and particularly the care of people in the disability sector. It might seem that that is very fitting. But on the other hand, Mr. Chair, quite a number of the clauses that we are about to, well, in our case, vote against, but that the government's attempting to pass through urgency in this House, actually have an impact on the Human Rights Act 1993. And I wondered why there was not an attempt to either amend that as a principal act or make any subsequent amendments to that act. And I really do want to ask the Minister and the Chair, who has returned for the debate, to answer that question, because I'm really quite alarmed at the fact that we are actually extinguishing the rights of a significant number of New Zealanders who you could argue have quite significant human rights issues, perhaps, extinguish their right to go to the Human Rights Commission as of yesterday. And that's quite a major part of what this this Amendment Act actually does, or this bill attempts to do. It's still a bill at this stage. And yet we have nothing here that amends the Human Rights Act 1993 as the principal act, and nothing that subsequently amends that. And why I raise that is because the Human Rights Act is the act that actually says what people, what is unlawful discrimination and who is eligible to go forward to have their cases heard. Here we are debating extinguishing those rights with no reference to amending the Human Rights Act in this piece of legislation that I can see. And perhaps I'm wrong about that, and the Minister may want to point me in the right direction. But in Part 2 of the Human Rights Act 1993, it goes on, it actually defines what is unlawful discrimination, but it also says, has a part of that act that prohibits what is unlawful discrimination. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Minister, but I believe we're doing exactly that in this Act. We are prohibiting a group of people from actually taking a case to find out whether they have been unlawfully discriminated against. And yet there is no reference to the Human Rights Act 1993. Here we are amending the principal act as being the New Zealand Public Health and Disability Act 2000. Yes, maybe it fits. But there's a substantial amendment that we make, and I would say an outrageous amendment, actually, an outrageous amendment that actually extinguishes people's rights under the Human Rights Act. Why are we not amending that as the principal piece of legislation? Why are we not even making any consequential amendments to that piece of legislation in this debate? And that's the very thing I think we would discover the answer to, perhaps, if we were allowed to have the normal democratic process of a select committee process. Or maybe the answer to my query is actually buried on this page. Perhaps it is, but we'll never know, because it's completely blanked out and we don't know. Maybe the explanation is all here. Maybe this explains why the Human Rights Act is left unamended by what we're debating today, despite the fact that that government is extinguishing the rights of people to access what the Human Rights Act 1993 says they have absolutely the right to do. I am therefore encouraged to and persuaded by my colleague Marion Street's suggestion that perhaps the best thing to do would have been to have had a stand-alone act in its own right, not to amend another act which partially speaks to this issue but partially doesn't, but perhaps to have a stand-alone piece of legislation. And the piece of legislation that really stands out in my mind that would have been really great to have used in this instance was actually a piece of American legislation which was around an Equal Pay Act. And that was a stand-alone piece of legislation that Barack Obama actually was one of the first pieces of legislation he signed when he took over the presidency. He named that act after the woman who took the equal pay case. He called it the Lily Ledbetter Equal Pay Act. Now, wouldn't that have been a magnificent thing to do in this instance, Mr Chair? Mr Chair? Mr Chair?
I call the honourable member Rajan Prasad.
Thank you.